Good morning. It is time for a long overdue episode of Your Morning Cup of Cow Shit. And this is overdue because it's probably one of the first misconceptions people come across when they start digging into this complex history of Point Reyes National Seashore. It was the first one that I encountered after my eyes were opened up out there, and I started saying, wait a minute, how is this possible? And even amongst my wildlife enthusiast friends, there was a sentiment that, well, yeah, that's bad, but you got to remember that it's thanks to the ranchers that we have that seashore. So this wasn't just coming from the mouths of ranchers and ranch supporters. This story had been spread so successfully that it was even being said by those that you would think are on the environmental side, on the conservation side. If it's not true, which I'm going to show you today that it isn't, how did it get spread so thoroughly? There's a lot of information in this video, so let me give you a couple of entertaining tidbits, a couple of quotes from the 1961 Congressional hearing where ranchers and their attorney flew in to testify against the proposed park plan. They stated that the weather was too bad, that it was too dangerous, that it would bring economic ruin to West Marin, that cows would not be able to tend to their duties of grazing and producing milk if people were in the seashore. Well, besides many decades of this story being spread without anyone really challenging it, I'll give you a few specific examples from recent history of how this misconception, the PC way of saying lie, is continuing to be spread. Just this week, the publication National Parks Traveler, while questioning the ongoing pollution in Point Reyes, still said the ranchers were an integral part of creating this seashore. Not true, but there it is, spread in journalism for anyone to read, to believe. I find it pretty generous that people who formed organizations and coalitions to fight the park's proposal to be credited as being integral to the creation of the seashore. I mean, if your definition of integral includes delaying the creation of the seashore due to opposition of the seashore, if your idea of integral means being paid a lot of money for your land, and then, thanks to your resistance, getting to stay on that land with finite leases, not infinite leases, finite leases, then yeah, you were integral. A more personal example, I was on Point Reyes station local radio back in September, and when my time was over on the radio, Melanie Gunn, the outreach coordinator for Point Reyes National Seashore, came on, and the very first words out of her mouth were, first of all, it's thanks to the ranchers that we have this seashore. That's coming directly out of your Park Service staff's mouth on the radio, and it was the first thing out of her mouth. Now, even if it was true, does anyone find it odd that the Park Service staff seem to be PR agents for the ranchers? Is that part of their job description? Now, the following is taken from an administrative history of Point Reyes National Seashore, which can be found on the Point Reyes National Seashore website. This is not my words. This is documentation that can be found on the Park Service website. I'm going to read, on June 29th, 1958, the San Francisco Chronicle ran a front-page article about the U.S. Seashore Park proposal, the first newspaper coverage of Point Reyes National Seashore's plan. Continuing, although local resistance sprung up as soon as the Chronicle released news of the MPS plan, the Point Reyes Seashore proposal fell on fertile ground in the wider San Francisco Bay Area. Thanks to this resistance, those authoring the Point Reyes National Seashore proposal had to go back to the drawing board. Quote, because they did not yet have the support of the Marin County Board of Supervisors or the ranching community, Miller and Ingle temporarily postponed congressional action on their bills. Continuing to read, when the Point Reyes proposal started to gain momentum in the late 1950s, according to local rancher Boyd Stewart, the area's ranchers didn't catch on time to oppose it much. Once the details of the Point Reyes proposal were released to the public, dairy ranchers raised an outcry and pledged to fight the seashore's establishment. They complained that an MPS seashore located in their midst was sure to destroy the dairy industry of Point Reyes and West Marin. In July 1958, 35 ranchers formed the West Marin Property Owners Association. Just prior to introducing his legislation that called for a Point Reyes study, Miller received a telegram from the Marin County Board of Supervisors informing him that the board was opposed to his planned legislation. The Board of Supervisors made its stance official in September 1958 when it voted 4-1 to oppose any plan for a national seashore at Point Reyes. The supervisors took the quick, unplanned vote after hearing from a delegation of Point Reyes ranchers. They made their decision without holding an open hearing and before they heard from any legislative history of the Point Reyes National Seashore Act. Wow. Here we have some examples going all the way back to the 50s of how much power the ranchers had to influence the Marin County Board of Supervisors, as well as the Marin Conservation League. And as I've come to learn, when they say conservation in Marin, they're talking about conserving farmland, ranch land, not conserving wildlife and wild habitat. For example, this is a quote from Carolyn Livermore, who was at the time president of the Marin Conservation League, wrote, "As true conservationists, we want to preserve dairying in this area and will do what we can to promote the health of this industry, which is so valuable to the economic and material well-being of our people and which adds to the pastoral scene adjacent to the proposed recreation project." And so the seeds of compromise are planted. Now let's get to some entertaining bits, because you haven't heard the words of the ranchers themselves yet. You've just heard excerpts from this historical guide to the administrative history. The following are quotes from the 1961 Congressional hearing at which several ranchers flew to Washington in order to testify against the park's proposed plan. Now the document is long, but it is online. You can read it for yourself if you doubt anything that I'm saying. But throughout it, the ranchers continually state that the area is not desirable for camping, it's not desirable for recreation, and that it is too dangerous. They take the Good Samaritan approach of saying, oh, you don't want people to fall off the cliffs here, you don't want them to drown in the ocean here. You can't have a park here. Don't do that. It would be a mischievous abuse of public trust to encourage people to visit the Point Reyes Peninsula in the belief that they would find suitable camping sites and weather. Yeah, everybody hates going to Point Reyes. The next part in bold letters is titled The Moral or Human Factor. And the quote goes, although sometimes in today's world people have to give to the public good, there is no need that the loyal dairy ranches of Point Reyes Peninsula give to an unnecessary park of minimal value that will serve only a few. The bulk of the rest of the comments coming from Grossi and Mendoza and others are basically saying, hey, this land is important to us. We settled here a long time ago. You owe it to us to let us stay here because we got here first, basically, which, of course, they didn't get there first. In fact, the history of these particular dairy ranch families is not as long as one would be made to believe. And before the ranches took it, the Spanish took it from the local coastal indigenous people. So there is a long history of stealing this land from people who are actually taking care of the land before the ranchers settled it and decided that history began when they began. Here are some great quotes. Quote, it will destroy the dairy industry of West Marin. It will destroy the livestock industry of West Marin. The area is not suited for park use of the kind and size proposed. It is cold, foggy, and windy most of the year. Here's some fun quotes. Barking dogs, youngsters, climbing fences, processions of family cars and trailers will create diversions which will distract the cows from tending to their daily chores of grazing and resting and producing the essential food product that makes this industry indispensable to Marin County and to San Francisco Bay Area. To be clear, tourists, the presence of humans and human activity, prevents cows from being able to graze and produce milk. That's strange because all of California is covered with cattle, surrounded by people. And continuing, saying once again, if the park goes in, the dairy industry will be destroyed. And according to the congressional testimony, even the leaseback proposal was rejected by the ranchers. This is a quote. In short, The leaseback proposal is completely unworkable. If the park goes in, the dairy industry will be destroyed. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Because ever since I started learning about this in 2018, I've been hearing the same thing that they were saying back in 1961, that this was going to bring economic ruin to West Marin if we get rid of the remaining ranches that are out there, that it's going to destroy the dairy industry. The same excuses used in 1961 are still being used today. The way that the perpetuated myth is spread, you would think that these ranchers did something that no one else would do. Selling land that the government is trying to buy, how does that make those people any different than anyone else who happened to be on that land at the time that the government wanted to turn it into a seashore? The difference is that these ranchers went out and formed delegations, associations, in order to fight the proposed plan of the seashore, including finding a way to influence the Marin Board of Supervisors into opposing the plan for the park. According to the administrative history, the Board of Supervisors' vote against the creation of the seashore actually had no legal bearing on whether or not NPS was able to proceed, but they wanted the local support. These delays and this opposition caused the authors of this proposal to keep going back to the drawing board, which meant that the price of acquiring the land continued to go up, and which meant that compromises had to be made on the way. The nicest thing that you can say about these ranchers is that after resisting and fighting the seashore, they finally caved in to a compromise and then got paid millions of dollars for their land. Wow, you're incredible people. And then, of course, there's that tiny detail that after getting paid for the land, they didn't leave. We, the taxpayers, got stuck subsidizing an industry that had already been dying at the time that the government came in and purchased that land. But again, how does selling your land for a proposal for a park make you any different than anyone else who would have been there getting that same offer? If my family or your family had been living there doing whatever business it happened to be that we were doing out there, do you think that we would be getting credit today for being integral to the creation of the seashore because we sold the land after resisting the plan? Again, how did these people receive near hero status through these stories when all they did was sell land the same way that anyone else that was living there at the time would have eventually done? In fact, people were already selling their land, selling even their dairy ranches when this was occurring. If anything can be said, it's that the resistance of the ranchers is why we ended up with this sad compromise of what could have been a glorious, glorious seashore, what could have been the Yellowstone of our coast. But instead, we have never-ending conflict, pollution of the land, killing of wildlife, also ranch families who already got paid for their land and who have land throughout the rest of Marin County can continue to stay pursuing industries that we, the taxpayers, have to prop up with subsidy money. All right, this video is already longer than I intended it to be. I'm going to break it up into multiple parts, but let me assure you, there's more where this came from.